Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Freeformers Unplugged. And if you are expecting the dulcet tones of Toby Kang, do not worry, he is here. We are going to be hearing an awful lot from him today on a topic which I would say is a particularly passion of yours, Toby. Why HR needs new metrics and not more industry reports. So, first of all, Toby, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm mid building a tree house, so I've put on, even though it's very warm outside, I've put on this jacket to cover up the sawdust and bird poo that I'm literally covered in. Because yes, that is what's on the tree house. It's a tree house underneath a tree. That they're the two things I'm probably going to encounter. So apart from that, I'm good. And also, as you know, I was up till the session finished at 2 o'clock in the morning, but I probably actually got to sleep about 3:30 because I was delivering a session to our good friends in New Zealand and Australia. And so I am an utter mess and I'm really tired, but I'm really up for this conversation. So it's good that it's a passionate one for me. Otherwise, I might have struggled to even just wake up for this one.
So, I mean, so much to unpick there, but I want to know, have you got the floor in the treehouse? Because that was your one thing you had to get done today.
Floor, roof, and literally as of 8 minutes ago, a slide.
A
Um,
slide.
yes, yeah. So I got a free climbing frame, a wooden climbing frame off Facebook Marketplace, and it had a slide on it. And so the slide has now been donated to the tree house, and as has much of the wood from the old climbing frame, to be honest.
That's
Anyway,
interesting. No, I mean, we're here for tree houses, aren't we?
well, we had as we saw from our clip yesterday, we had sausages and cheese yesterday, and now we've got tree houses, sawdust, and bird poo. So tangents aplenty.
We just like to keep things fresh on Freeformers Unplugged. So, why HR needs new metrics, not more industry reports. So, just start by telling me why this is a particular topic that you really care about, that really kind of grinds your gears, and why you wanted to talk about it on this live stream.
Firstly, I think I made an error because I should have put HR and learning and development. I think both are the same. I think when you're inside an organization, I kind of know what level of reporting goes on. There's either none or it's really kind of spreadsheet based, and there's someone doing a lot of reporting and kind of just pulling data from different platforms and not really doing any data storytelling. Um, and then when you look at kind of thought leadership and companies like Gallup, there is some really purposeful research and insight being gathered, but it doesn't really translate and mean anything to the day-to-day job. So I kind of argue that it's a little bit pointless other than making noise for noise's sake. The basic equation of any HR and L&D team: treat your people better, develop them, whatever, and your company will perform better. That's kind of the hypothesis, but none of the data I've seen publicly available really demonstrates that. It just kind of alludes to that it might be the case, but doesn't really do it as a matter of fact.
So, do you think that's down to the data that's put out there publicly? Obviously, these companies have got to make money, right? So maybe they keep the best stuff behind closed doors. Or do you think it's more about the way that people kind of use that data, thinking, in particular around oh, this means we'll have 21% more productivity. Although actually Gallup's recently I got the latest statistics. It's not 21% more productivity. It's now only 14% higher productivity for engaged people.
You're looking at different numbers to me because I have 18% here. So
Oh,
what year is mine
oh
on?
no. 14% higher productivity, production records and evaluations, and 18% higher productivity sales. I mean, what does that even mean?
Well, it doesn't mean anything. And I think when you look at the Gallup, so Gallup studies over 3.3 million workers across 100,000 plus teams. Now, more you're the data person, right? But more data doesn't mean better storytelling, I would say. And there's almost too much data there. I think if I look at some of the research that we've done, let's just compare two industries that I can do off the top of my head: field marketing and manufacturing. Now, the return on investment and productivity in both of those situations is vastly different. And just on a very loose, I'm just going to put out some generic numbers, but like on an average in field marketing, for every pound you spend on your people, you get £3 back. In manufacturing, for every pound you spend, you're going to probably get around £30 back. Now, why is that? There's a lot of machines, there's a lot of things doing the work. And what I think that tells us is that this doesn't this kind of ignores company size, industry, geography. It just ignores anything and kind of goes, you know what? All this information is really good, and actually, it's the same across every single company, and none of that stuff matters, which really annoys me.
Yeah, it kind of flattens the data, I guess you would say. It doesn't give you anything particularly meaningful to go off. And then what about the way that, you've seen HR, L&D teams kind of using these kind of insights? Are they using them in ways that actually make a tangible impact and difference to their organizations?
I think it's generally just quoted as, hey, can we have some more budget? Because Gallup says if we do this, we're going to get more money. And it's like, you probably have better, you undoubtedly have better data in your organization to do some calculations, some mathematics to prove, and obviously, as you would say, right, correlation doesn't equal causation, but at least
Hmm.
you'd have some more meaningful data. And even then, when we look at some of the benchmarking stuff we would do, right, that you would look at companies of a similar size in your industry. You wouldn't necessarily look at anyone else. And even when you do that, right, the thing that muddies the water there is we did it recently for tech company of 1,000 people. One of them was clearly relying on quite a heavy kind of freelance network to do the work because their headcount was super low, yet they were turning over a lot, quite a substantial amount of money. And so, and that's a hypothesis. We don't know that for sure, but when you look at the numbers, so even at that level, right, you kind of go, you need to be able to, if you really want to understand how you're performing, benchmarking essentially, you can't really look at Gallup stats because that's not going to help you a massive amount. That could lead you down the wrong path. But also, even when you do look at similar headcount in industry, you've got to apply this kind of very critical lens. And HR and L&D cannot do that in silo, right? When we did that piece of work, when we talked to the managing director and the chief people officer, they went, "Oh yeah, that company works like that, and that company works like that." And you kind of go, okay, well, this is great insight now because we know that either we take some of that benchmarking data with a pinch of salt, or we remove them from the benchmark completely because you're like, well, they're not comparable, so we can't draw any conclusions from that. And then the thing again that you will always say, this is like how how Emily has inspired Toby this episode, is that you're the best benchmarking data you have is your past self, really. That's what you should be benchmarking against anyway. But I think the thing that I like about looking at industry is, when you're working in a marketplace, okay, let's take field marketing. If the industry suddenly takes a nosedive, at least you've got an indicator that goes, okay, if we're also nosediving, it's highly likely because that's an industry thing, not because we're doing anything particularly wrong. Airlines is a good example, right? In the pandemic, everyone went pew.
Yeah.
The numbers, not the planes.
Thanks for
So
clarifying that.
I just I've been feeding small children, the aeroplane coming in and all that kind of stuff. That would be the noise I make. Anyway, so what you end up is that you kind of go, okay, our performance is dropping off, but it's not completely just us. Actually, we are tracking against the industry. This Gallup research, and I imagine if you sign up and pay lots of money, you might get it cut by industry. But even if you look at something like Great Places to Work, the data isn't meaningful enough to make any conclusions at all. Especially when Great Places to Work is like you send out your survey and look, we're going for Great Places to Work, and everyone answers positively. And every company on Great Places to Work is achieving like 99% success rate on all the metrics, and you're like, it's just not believable. Especially, I can kind of believe on like companies that are 10 people big. I can believe that, but companies that are tens of thousands of people big, are you kidding me? That you've got 99%. What is the? Who are you talking to? How many? What percentage of people have actually responded? That's a stat you wouldn't get on Great Places to Work. That would give you a really interesting thing. And the thing that we often gets thrown at a human-centered design process is when you go and do your research is you're only talking to the people that have got something to say because they're pissed off, and so
Yeah.
that it skews the data. And it's like, well, we're not trying to create, and it's part of the human-centered design process, right? At that stage, you're not necessarily trying to create measurable data. You're trying to gather insight that you can act upon, and that's a real difference. Sorry, I went all over the place there.
You did go all over the place. That's fine. Lots of bits to pick up on. Before you do, I just want to say if you are watching this on LinkedIn, please do say hi if you have an opinion. If you think Toby's right, wrong, have some provocative questions, please do pass them on. Put them in chat. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll do my best to keep an eye on it. I'll be honest. I get a bit muddled with 15 things going on at
It's all
once.
right. I got chat open here. I can see.
Okay, you could answer them. But so okay, you just talked quite a lot about how maybe we're measuring some of the wrong things, or we're going on and measuring things because we think we ought to. I mean, I know that Freeformers we take a slightly different approach, but how should you go about deciding like what matters in terms of metrics?
It's a well-trodden path that people would reference marketing at this point, right? So marketing, late 90s, turn of the century, a lot of TV ads, radio ads, billboards, all of these, big campaigns that really marketing had no idea what the measurable impact of it was. And because marketing and sales is, whether you like it or not, probably the lifeblood of a business as a CEO would see it, is that you need to prove that the activity you're doing there is worth it. Now, the big thing that helps, marketing in particular is digitization. Digitization means that you have access to data and understanding how things are happening. If you're still, stuck at the turn of the century and using email, open rate, click through rate, and a very basic example. But that is a really interesting example, right? Open rate and click through rate on email from a marketing perspective. How many organizations are looking at open rate and click through rate on the emails they send out to their employees? I
Well,
haven't come. Well, sorry, go on.
I would just like, in defense of people who are not doing it, we're a Google organization. We use Google through and through. We have a client that we have to use Microsoft with. I have been trying to work out how on earth you do open and click through rates with Outlook, and the answer is you can't. You need to have an additional a bit of software, Microsoft Dynamics 365, in order to do it. And so you
Or
have to
no,
request this as
no.
additional things.
Oh, well, yeah, but Mailchimp. So
Yeah, but you have to be able to use this. If you work in a big enterprise, you're not just allowed to chuck stuff on.
I would agree with you and say you're right. Don't do it.
Outlook is terrible.
I worked with a large organization, international organization, tens of thousands of people, and we were doing something. I was like, why don't we just try Mailchimp? And I managed to get that, not me personally, but myself and the stakeholders managed to get that through tech procurement because there was a valid business case to do so. We are spending
Yep.
a substantial amount of money on activity, and we do not know if it's working. So therefore, we need to have a platform that allows us to do that. And so as long
Sure.
as you go through tech procurement and understand the technology, like there isn't, and this is where I think HR and L&D gets its knickers in a twist, if you like. It's like, what technology does the HR and L&D industry have to achieve to do this? It's like, it probably doesn't. I went to learning in HR technologies last week. It probably doesn't. It's all awash with kind of building and scaffolding on the existing technology that came before it. So why not divert and have a look at something else? I'm not saying it's really easy, just go on Mailchimp, sign up and do it. But in some organizations, I've seen teams just do that and went, let's just at least prove there's a business case. In large organizations, that tends to be how you circumnavigate it. It's like, shh, let's get this piece of technology in, use it, prove the business case. And then we'll go to procurement and say, can we use it? And they go, well, you shouldn't have been using it in the first place. And they went, oh, we know, we're sorry. Can we have it? Yeah, probably. And that tends to be how it works, right? Rightly or wrongly. But I think you're absolutely right. If you try and do this with your existing tech stack, you're probably going to come undone quite quickly.
Okay. So we went down a rabbit hole, as we always do. I was very focused on open and click-through rates. It's a very timely issue that I am currently having. Oh, Outlook, I can't believe it. Anyway, we'll leave the horror of Outlook behind for a moment. But thinking more broadly about what kind of things you should be measuring. Um, I mean, how do you even start? You have what's potentially you've been measuring for a while. Let's say you're measuring retention, obviously important, tenure, similar. But like, what other kind of things should we be looking at?
Well, there's a couple of different responses, I think, to that question. The first one, again, I go back to that tech company we're working with. Like, how do you measure the performance of a team? And depending on what that team does, that is going to be different. And I think what we tend to fall into the trap of is, okay, we need to measure the performance of our people. And we need to do it exactly the same way for all 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, however. And like, that's, again, you fall into the Gallup the Gallup kind of mode where it's like, okay, let's just benchmark everybody in exactly the same way. Now, that will tell you some stuff, but it's not going to tell you a great deal. So actually, you've kind of got to go team by team and go, what are the measurable things that we can impact? And again, this sits outside of the traditional HR and L&D tech and data stack to go and do that. It requires you to go and have a conversation and network with the business, which is what, for my money, business partnering really should be doing. Probably not some of the stuff that it does do, but how. And it's not that difficult a conversation, I believe, because if you ask, they'll give it up. The tricky thing is then getting that data on a regular basis to bring it into your ecosystem to then be able to bring it into a dashboard, whatever, and tell the story. That is the difficult bit. Understanding what the data is and how they measure performance, like that is the easy bit. So I think that's the first one. I think the second one, I kind of alluded to it, is like you kind of either got to create new data sources or go and look at data sources that you don't currently have access to. And again, easier said than done, I do admit, but this is why, a lot of our work is in the small to medium business market because it's less hard to do that in a company of 1,000 people. 10,000 people, I worked with an organization of 30,000 people. My stakeholders flat out refused to even try. And I was like, well, you're kind of given up before you've even started. Bearing in mind, I was kind of a bit. I asked for 250 lines of data, and I was like, that's clearly never going to happen. But
Yeah.
even when I went, okay, 250 is too many. What about these 10? And even then, I didn't get any. Why? Because they didn't sit within their sphere of influence. A couple of them were within the HR. This was an L&D team I was working, but a couple of those data points were in the HR team, and even they struggled to get that data from the HR team. So you've got to work that. You can't just go, oh, I asked and they said no. And it's like, well, why did they say no? They do not understand why you need that data. They're not just going to give that data up freely, even though you're all working with the same people, so I think you kind of should. But why are you going after that data, and understanding how it's powering a data model that you may have? The other one is like, what data sources don't you have? So the one we always use in that example, right, is post-employment advocacy. What are people thinking, feeling, and doing once they leave your organization post-employment? Quite an interesting thing to be measuring that pretty much no organization does unless they have an alumni network. But is that being measured as part of the alumni network's performance or actually the employee experience performance? Because a huge amount of insight you're gonna be able to gather about what people are feeling, and doing once they leave an organization.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's just a massive, it's like, and we've talked before about how you get a lot of opportunity from people who have left your organization. They go to a new organization. So you've got a potential for new clients, new partnerships, depending on the nature of your organization. Maybe they'll even encourage people to go and work for you. So it's absolutely a lot of value that is not quantified very much. Um, so you talked quite a bit there about like using data in kind of the not really the wrong way, but not being able to like translate it, not being able to tell a story and turn that into action. So I know that we talk about the Cone B behavioral change model. So capability, so to change behavior, someone needs to have the capability to do the thing, the behavior change, the opportunity to do it, and the motivation to do it. And it's those three things. Do you think one of those has perhaps more sway in HR, talking about how HR's mindset should be changed towards data? Is it capability, opportunity, and motivation, or a mix of all three?
Oh, so I answered the question in my head incorrectly. And let me answer the question incorrectly, then I'll try and measure it
Okay.
answer it correctly.
Everybody else, this is what I have to deal with on a daily basis. Oh yeah, I've done it in my head. Well, share with the
So
class, please.
so capability, opportunity, motivation. What I was thinking there is, before you finished the question, was what are we measuring? Are we measuring capability, opportunity, or motivation in our
Mm,
workforce? And I think most HR teams measure motivation. I think that
okay.
it's all about your opinion, your perception as, do I feel valued? All this kind of stuff, right, is more about the motivating factors. Are we measuring capability? Now that's a very difficult one to do because it's subjective mostly, unless you're going to go down the qualification route and certificate route and say they've got this qualification certificate. I don't think there's much rationale in there. But I think peer to peer and manager to peer team conversations, you can start having at least a fair judgment on that. The question we always ask, right, is like, ask the manager and the person in the team exactly the same question and look at the perception gap between the two, and you could do the same for capability, right? The other one is also opportunity. Are they having the opportunity to perform? I don't think capability and opportunity are measured by a HR and L&D team. It's kind of all about the motivation and the feely stuff. So if you're subscribed to the Cone B model, you've only got 1/3 of the data you need to measure effective behavior change. So no wonder L&D, again, I've used the phrase gets its knickers in a twist, is because you're trying to measure behavior change by looking at attitudinal data is probably what I'd call, rather than motivation. To answer your actual question,
be nice.
when HR and L&D are looking to measure stuff, is it a capability issue, an opportunity issue, or a motivation issue? I think it's probably all three. I think no, I don't think it is. I think HR and L&D teams are absolutely crying out for a way to measure their impact that gets traction at board level. I think, a lot of the conversation I hear and see is about that. The problem is no one then does anything substantially different. It's just like, well, position attrition in terms of pounds, measure retention in terms of pounds, measure recruitment in terms of pounds. It's like, no, you're fundamentally still using the same metric. You're just using some arbitrary statistic. And again, this is where you see things on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, it costs £32,000 to hire a new person. It's like, well, does it? Because it might do in your generic statistic that you've got here, but that is something you could substantially prove in your organization given access to the right data. And even at that level, right, I think most HR teams defer to, okay, if I Google how much it costs to recruit a new hire, and we recruited this amount of people, I'll put those two numbers together and assume that applies to my organization. And so I think the motivation is there. People are trying. It's not like no one's sitting there going, well, we don't need to measure our value. We're the HR team. Although there are some people out there who go, well, we deal with tribunals and blah, blah, blah. And if you move us from the organization, it fails. Not measurable impact, to be honest, especially if a tribunal never comes.
Oh.
Is there the opportunity? Yeah, I absolutely. I fail to believe that no one is kind of going, oh, we don't need to see any HR metrics. And if they are, then bad leadership from the company for sure. But if the argument is, oh well, we always present the data last at the end of the meeting and blah blah blah, it's because it's like no one sees any meaning in it. That's why it's deferred to the end. That's why people don't want to listen to it. It's like it doesn't mean anything to them. It's not that they don't appreciate the work. It's not that they don't think that you're not doing anything. It's like you are not providing the data and the statistics and the information that give the rest of the board the assurances that what you're doing is having a substantial impact. So the opportunity is there. We just keep scoring own goals. And what's the other one? Capability. I think capability is probably the biggest one. I think capability both in terms of just like awareness of being able to measure things differently, and then the capability to go and network and stakeholder manage across the organization to go and get that data. I think they are two capabilities that are severely lacking. I think what HR and L&D want is like, okay, what should I be doing? We had a conversation this week with the client, right? They use ChatGPT, say, what should I measure to demonstrate the impact of my HR team? And you should see the absolute dross that it came out with. Just like, this doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to a HR team. So it's going to mean even less to a board level. And so we kind of don't have, and I want to try and be as balanced as possible. We don't give ourselves the time and space to try and rethink what that is like. If we look at that Milton Keynes-based company we did some work with, right? The only reason they didn't adapt and move to a new data model and try and measure things differently is because they were so entrenched in the here and now and churning out these monthly reports. And so they spent a lot of time and effort doing that. So to go and find and bring in new data was arduous. To then generate new dashboards was arduous. And so what's the easiest thing to do? Well, I'll just keep doing the same thing I'm doing. Why? Because I still get paid exactly the same amount if I do the new thing or not. Now, you increase your chance of being made redundant, of course. But like there's no critical imperative to do this. And I suppose that links into opportunity, right? Is there the opportunity? There is an opportunity should you choose to walk through it, but there's no consequence if you don't walk through that door.
Yeah, I was going to push back on you an opportunity, but you've come around full circle. I think that the opportunity is theoretically there, but the practical, when do I have the time and the
Yeah.
headspace to do it, isn't, because of the way HR has, and L&D, but particularly HR has to deal with, fighting fires, things being last minute, communications, just dealing with like the general drudge of the business that so often they have to deal with because other people don't. They're like, oh, HR will deal with that. Like we do empathize. We absolutely do. It's very
Well,
easy to say you should be doing this, but we know that you've got 1,000 things going on at the same time.
and it's taken us the best part of 2 years to figure out a real solid way of doing this. We have tried and tested various different models. I wouldn't even say we've got like the perfect version, but we have a version that is better than most. That a HR team or a managing director, CEO, whatever, can hang their hat on and go, okay, this starts giving me more insight that I was previously getting. And even if I can get them just to acknowledge that, that's better. This is better than how we were reporting before. Is it and I think L&D in particular tries to find the perfect measurement model. It's like, if you're going to wait around to find the perfect measurement model, it's just never going to happen. But I've been in L&D for 15 years. When have I had the most time and space to think about how I would measure the impact? The past 2 years where we've started a business. Never had the time or space to do it because I've always been focused on it. Even when I'm on the supplier side, it's exactly the same. You're just churning out stuff because that's what you're doing. So, like I say, I empathize and I don't blame anyone at all, because you're doing what the system is asking you. The system is broken, not the individual for the opportunity, for sure.
So if you want to break out of the system, like who do you think could break out of the system and find a new way of measuring, of demonstrating value, of really capturing those metrics that matter? Before, you talked about potentially the small and medium businesses having more opportunity than the large corporates. Is that something you'd recommend if you're in that environment, really going for it, or what?
Well, I think it's quite a well-trodden path at the moment that, HRDs and senior HR folk are leaving large organizations to set themselves up by themselves as a consultant or a fractional HR director. And they go and work for small to medium businesses because they believe that they'll have a bit more adaptability and ability to do things differently in a new way. And on the whole, I would say that probably doesn't actually happen, because no one is going to give you the new way of doing things. You have to be able to think of that yourself. And so if all of your experience and all of your skills, your capability is coming from large corporate HR, what are you going to do when you get to the small organization? You're going to sell and do the things that you have demonstrable expertise and capability in. And therefore, you get stuck in a cycle. And we find this with small companies. They hire HR people who are trying to apply big corporate HR thinking to them, and it just doesn't work because it's kind of hidden in a large organization that doesn't work. You can kind of get away with it because it's like, oh, well, we kind of have to have a HR and L&D team, so we'll just write off that cost essentially. Whereas in a small to medium business, it's like, it's critical. It's absolutely critical. And if you then do you just go in and do the arbitrary stuff. You'll go in, do the arbitrary stuff, and then you leave. The big ones I'll look at the moment are the new Employment Rights Bill or Act that's come in. People updating policy and handbooks based on that. Sexual harassment that comes as part of that. There's people just going out and doing, lots of training in that space. And so in both those situations, updating policy and delivering training, you're not really thinking about how to problem solve in new ways. You're delivering the same stuff. Regardless of how engaging the training is, you're still operating in this sphere of training or policy is going to be the way to influence behavior. And if they're the two things you're using to influence behavior, no wonder you can't measure it. How do you measure the impact of policy? You can't. Did everyone do the mandatory e-learning? How many sexual harassment cases have there been? Yada yada yada. It's like, well, those two things are not distinctly related. So I'm not saying it's easy, but it's also, you make it harder if you carry on doing the same activity as well. So it kind of, the problem extends beyond just a data problem. It's an activity problem as well.
So what should I be doing? Let's say I work in a small and medium business. You could decide if I'm HR or if maybe I don't even have HR. I'm like the founder or the managing director. Like, what should I be doing to demonstrate the value and to measure my employee experience?
You just go in with a product mindset. And again, it's very easy for someone just to come and say, "Oh, just do that." But it's a product mindset, right? If you I say tret, because that's what my nan used to say. If you everything you did as a product or service as if your employees were a customer, then you start thinking in completely different ways in terms of adoption, in terms of marketing that opportunity, um, all the different things that launch you do with launching a product. But we don't do that. We deliver training and policy. I'm just going to use those two as an example. I know there's other stuff, right? Well, internal comms, emails. We deliver these three things and kind of go, well, we did it. Cool. And what? And what? He's, yeah, the L&D team will complain that no one's engaging with the amazing experience or content they've created. Well, maybe they don't actually need it. So have you done product design? Probably not, because you should be designing for the needs of the end user, not for the needs of your selfish needs of having a job that creates content or the organization checking boxes. And policy is an interesting one, right? In every other walk of life, if you are served with some terms and conditions, you get served them, you scroll right to the bottom, you click a box, you click next. And that is an accepted level of acceptance of those terms and conditions. Now, I'd say it's pretty easy to pick holes in that, especially when the Employment Rights Bill says you have to take all reasonable steps. So you could argue that that isn't all reasonable steps. But why am I allowed to hand over data freely to a multinational organization when realistically I'm not looking at it? So it's accepted somewhere else. I think there's not a lawyer. Would there be a genuine case for saying, well, we do it in every other walk of life, so why wouldn't I do it here? If it's reasonable over here, you tell me why it's not reasonable here, and I'll do something more or different. And then, and that's why people then defer to training over and above. It's like, well, okay, we've got to be seen to be doing stuff to meet the all reasonable steps, but you're satisfying law and policy. You're not satisfying behavior and performance. So you're designing from the wrong point. What is the problem in the organization at the moment, and what can you design as either an environment, the environment, the opportunity, the skills for someone to act and behave in a different way, and therefore how do you measure it? But that's delivered as that's a product mindset, right? Because I'm not coming into this, oh, I need to deliver a policy, I need to deliver training. I need to deliver something that fixes this issue. And inherently, by just even doing that, you'll end up with something to measure because we know it's a problem.
So when you say like product mindset, particularly thinking about the whole like employee experience life cycle, or the funnel as we like to refer to it as, I can think of some things that really lend themselves really nicely to a product mindset. Recruitment experience, that could be a product. Onboarding experience, offboarding experience. But then there's kind of all that stuff in the middle. How do you apply a product mindset to just kind of general existence whilst you're employed?
I think one of the revelations I think I've probably had, revelation sounds grand, but the company of 1,000 people, they have 200 managers, right? So you can deliver a product or service to 1,000 people, or you can deliver a product or service to 200 people that impacts the other 800. Which one of those which one of those do you think you have the most opportunity? Well, I would genuinely go after the 200, because then you're looking for the network effect to happen. What you do is when you try and do this, this carte blanche, this applies to everyone approach, you reduce the impact massively because you're not really focusing in on anything. And so I'm going to wheel out the old phrase that I always use: customers. The Mailchimp second mention on this podcast. Lucky them.
They should be sponsoring us,
Yeah, I
really.
know, right? Freeformers Unplugged, sponsored by Mailchimp. No, they
It's
had their
not.
they had it definitely isn't. They had their campaign customers. Like, why would you treat all of your customers exactly the same? They have their own different, pains, gains, motivations, all of that kind of stuff. And so it's more about when you're doing that stuff in the middle, is if you're doing a one size fits all approach, you've already lost, especially if your recruitment, your employer brand is a product in itself and it's advertising that you're diversity is our superpower, or we're the most diverse organization in the world, blah, 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 blah. It's like, you can't live and breathe that if you are just giving the same experience to every single employee, because that, by its design, isn't designing for diversity. And so the products and services you deliver, you're always trying to aim for 100% in HR, right? That's the other thing. Like, you're always trying to aim for 100%. I want 100 people to 100% to read this email, 100% to do done the training, 100% to have acknowledged the policy. And it's like, yeah, I get that, but again, you're coming from this compliance perspective rather than a performance perspective. What do you want them to do differently, and what product or service do you deliver to them that helps them do that differently? And by using the product, I would assume, no, I would know because I've done it, is that you design the product with the measurement almost baked in. Now, I'm not talking about happy sheets either, just while we're here, right? But like, what can you do? The thing, let me try and give you, I'll give you like an actual tacit example. So Bandersnatch, the Netflix Charlie Brooker Black Mirror choose your own adventure thing. I think Bear Grylls did a version of it. Carmen Sandiego, the cartoon, there was one as well. Essentially, interactive videos where you get to choose your own adventure. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've been in the e-learning industry or the learning industry for a while. Articulate storyline can do that. No, it can't. Absolute bullshit. No, it can't. The reason why the Netflix one is different is because the user interface is way slicker than anything a learning provider has ever delivered. Unless you've worked with me, because I've actually designed the Netflix version for several organizations. But that's by the by. How does it differ? When you get to a point in time where you have to make a decision, there's a time limit. You have to make that decision within either 5 or 10 seconds. You're presented with two options. What doesn't happen? The narrative doesn't stop. You're not taken away from the situation to go, how would I act in this situation? You're in that moment, make the decision now. And so when we delivered something like this, a previous organization I worked with, what we saw was when you gave someone a decision time of 10 seconds, there were some people that went, oh, that one. And they would act within less than a second. Some people would take the whole 10 seconds. So what we hypothesized there was that the people who are answering within a second, that is like an instinctual reaction. That's what I do. I do that. People who are doing it in 10 seconds less, it's kind of like, they're kind of thinking about the game mechanic and stuff like that. And so what we did is we focused on that instinctual data. How are people instinctively acting when placed in these scenarios? And therefore, when we designed those decision points, they weren't just decision points to drive the narrative. They were decision points about indicative behavior in the organization, because you're actively putting someone in a simulation to act differently, but also disregarding it when you probably can make an assumption that they're not acting naturally as well. And so putting people in situations and creating the mechanics to measure that, something like that would work, right? Where the product is designed to train people and get them to understand how to act in different situations. You reflect on it afterwards and all this kind of stuff. But there's a measurable impact there as well. You're kind of you're giving the opportunity for people to perform in different ways. You're giving them the opportunity to understand the capability. The motivation might not necessarily be there because you've got to motivate them to get there in the first place. But it's the fact that you might sit around and the thing I said before, right? Sit around and wait for the right data to be presented to you and go, here you go. This is the data you need to prove the thing that you're doing. It's like, no, you might have to create your own data points. And when HR and L&D are tasked with creating their own data points, they send out a survey. And let's not go down the whole rabbit hole of surveys, because we've done many a live stream on that.
Do that on a weekly basis almost. Okay. So I really understand how learning leads its way really nicely, or lends itself really nicely to product design. But what about something that's a bit more like core HR, like recruitment, org design, benefits and reward? Pick one of those and then tell me how I could apply a product mindset and measure the impact of it.
Recruitment's a relatively straightforward one, I would like to think, because it's sales. Recruitment is sales, whether you like it or not. Whether you can be a recruiter, I'm not a salesperson. You are. Many recruiters I've worked with act in the same way as a salespeople. The good recruiters act like good salespeople. The bad recruiters act like bad salespeople. So the metrics are very much the same. How are you attracting and converting? What activity are you doing to attract and convert those people from, awareness to consideration to conversion to, employees, to use the marketing term. So I think if you use funnel metrics there, that's, at what point of the recruitment process are we falling down? Where is that point in the user journey where people are sticking, where people either turn around and go, no, I don't want to work for you, or we find out that the person's the wrong person for the organization? What point of our, it's probably more of a service than a product here, is what part of the service are we delivering? Where does it fall down and why? That's where I'd go. Benefits is a really interesting one, actually. So, most benefits platforms have a million and one different ways to save money, get vouchers, get discounts, all of this kind of stuff. You log in and bam, you're just presented with a wall of the choice architecture is all wrong, right? Because it's what's the phrase? It's not analysis paralysis. It's decision fatigue, whatever you call it. It's like I, I just don't know where to go. As a platform, so little about me that you're unable to present me with the very stuff that I would need. And so, therefore, if I do not log into your employee benefits platform and see the value I want straight away, then I'll probably just leave and never come back. And so, you really need to understand your end user or end users really well to present them with that. And I think that's a huge failing on most employee benefit platforms. That I've had probably 3 or 4 of the biggest employee benefits platforms at various companies I've worked with. I can tell you on one hand how many times I've actually used them because I never knew what was there and that value, right? So in that world, it's like, well, I'm a very specific user case, but what's blocking there? Do I not want to save money? Well, that's not true. I'd love to be able to save money. But you don't know what I do, where I go. You've done no work to really understand the end user to present them with the right version of that product. The product might, the employee benefits plan, the product might be absolutely perfect. And it might have absolutely everything I want, but it's also surrounded by other dross that I just don't need. And it just makes me go, oh, I can't do this.
Sure. Okay. So we're coming to the end of our live stream. I know we generally like to keep these to around the 45-minute mark. So just could you leave if someone's watching this and they want to do something different, what should they do? Aside from talking to us, obviously, but what should they do?
The most success I've had is what part of HR or L&D are you working in, and what is a similar industry that does what is an industry that does something similar, right? So internal comms is a great one. If you're in internal comms, quite clearly that aligns quite well to marketing. So what I would do is I'd start going to marketing conferences. I start talking to my marketing team. It's like, okay, as you as a marketing team, when you send emails out to customers, what are you doing? How are you measuring the impact? How are you designing that experience? What insight do you design from? Now, I'm not saying all marketeers are better than internal comms people, far from it, but I would start looking out of my own known universe. Recruitment's a good one as well. Right? That I would look at sales. Sales is what I'd look at. I'd go, okay, from a sales perspective, what are you doing? I'm not saying adopt everything they do, but at least go to them and understand the design and measurement of what they're doing to influence, because they've had to prove their value far sooner than HR and L&D ever has. So that's where I would start. And the beauty of that is you don't even, I say go to a marketing conference, right? You don't even have to do that. If you've got marketeers in your company, just go and talk to them. But we work in some organizations where it's like, that's too difficult. And you just have to break out, even talking to your end user, right? In some instances, going on the shop floor, as it were, that is always perceived as a huge amount of effort. But actually, even those two things are going to help you design your future. Because we talked about this in terms of AI adoption, slight tangent, but on 45 minutes, he goes on the tangent, is that the reason why most AI training and deployment fails is because no one really understands how that is going to change how they do their work. So it's why the first bit of training that we do on any AI things, we'll give you 2 hours, really, to give you the base level of knowledge, to inspire you to think about how you might apply it to your work. Because I am not going to be able to tell you how to apply it to your work. And I would waste your time and my time if that was the case. What was the question? Why have I gone on that tangent? No, what would you do? What would you do differently, right? And so it's that and I go back to the issue that you said, the opportunity, the time and headspace that you have is minimal. So you've got to kind of make one of these gains somewhere in the organization, even if it's small, which is why I break it down like internal comms, go and talk to marketing. And even if that's the only thing you do for the year, just make that progress in that slither, right? Don't do all the other stuff. But it's the same thing with AI, right? You've got to think about how you're going to do things differently. And we've never really been forced as a workforce to think about that so much because AI will have a transformative effect on how you do your work. It also, you have to rewire your brain. AI has rewired my brain. You've helped me unwire the way I wired it because, like, that's actually not the best way to work with AI. Still on that journey, right? But you end up coming up against hardships and walls and hours spent developing a tool and it doesn't do the thing you want to do. It's a more difficult thing. But if you're sat frustrated that week in, week out, you're doing the same thing, whether it's respected, not respected, I don't really care in this instance. But if you're continually doing the same thing, it's the definition of insanity if you're expecting a different result.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I will leave it there. Otherwise, I will go on for about an hour.
Wonderful. So yeah, change one small thing. Go and get some inspiration from other parts of your organization. What are they measuring? How can you take that back and apply it to what you're doing? Great words, Toby. Well, thank you very much. It's been it's nice to have the tables kind of turned for a while. Maybe it's nice for you. I don't know, to be the one not asking
I
the
don't know.
questions.
There felt like a lot of pressure, like because I don't really know what you're going to ask me, so I have to think more.
Yeah, you gave me a list of questions, but they're not great questions, so I just rewrote them all and just asked you random things on the
I
fly.
would assume you are the best at writing and answering questions in our team, so I would expect nothing less.
Well, thank you very much. That's it from us. Next week, looking at our spreadsheet anyway, we are talking about why people who've worked in hospitality are more down to earth. I am looking forward to this one. You and I have both worked in hospitality. I think it does change you as a person. So more thoughts on that next time. But up for now, it is goodbye from me, goodbye from Toby. See you next time.
Catch you later.